Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment at WCPSS y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. As a reminder, today's session was prepared by the Office of Student Assignment. This session is designed to help you learn more about the student assignment planning process and Policy 4150, explore current enrollment and facility trends, and share your questions and feedback to help inform the development of the next district enrollment plan. As a reminder, today's session will focus primarily on the enrollment growth and upcoming school construction projects in Eastern Wake and Central area. Our session will last for no more than an hour and a half. We will begin with a presentation and conclude by responding to questions from today's session. We recognize that now and throughout the session, you may have questions for the presenter or the planning team. In order to capture your questions, we will be using the Q&A feature within Google Meet. To access this feature from a computer, please click on the grid icon in the toolbar on your screen. If you are using a mobile device, select the three dots first, then select the icon with the three shapes labeled Activities. You should then see a Q&A feature identified by a question mark icon. To ensure your questions are anonymous, our host and moderators will be monitoring the Q&A for questions and capturing them throughout this evening's session. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that means your question has been successfully captured by our moderators and you do not need to resubmit your question. We will make every effort to respond to your questions toward the end of our session. In addition, we will use your questions to update the FAQ portion of our website. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment at wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. In addition, we are asking that you contribute to the larger community discussion related to enrollment planning via Thought Exchange. The Thought Exchange will remain open through, well, we're past April 30th, but it will remain open through May 24th. After it is closed, we will summarize the feedback received through the Thought Exchange and will share this summary on the assignment planning website. No one will be personally identified in the summary. We are often asked if your feedback actually impacts the planning process. The short answer is yes. Feedback from previous planning cycles has led to an expansion of the stability rules so that more students are eligible to remain assigned to their current school following a reassignment, changing the enrollment strategy for new schools so that a mixture of new developments and existing communities are assigned to new schools, which slows the rate at which new schools fill up, and other improvements to the planning process. Your input during this phase of the planning process truly informs the development of enrollment plans. All of the information we will share during this evening's session, along with other tools and resources to help you better understand the planning process, can be found on our district website. Before I turn things over to our presenter, I would like to remind everyone that we will be using the Q&A feature in Google Meet to capture your questions throughout this session. To access this feature from a computer, please click on the grid in the toolbar on your screen. If you are using a mobile device, select the three dots first, then select the icon with the three shapes. You should then see a Q&A feature identified by a question mark icon. To ensure your questions are anonymous, our host and moderators will be monitoring the Q&A for questions and capturing them throughout this evening's session. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that means that your question has been successfully captured by our moderators and you do not need to resubmit your question. We will make every effort to respond to your questions toward the end of our session. In addition, we will use your questions to update the FAQ portion of our website. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. And now, I will turn things over to our presenter, Susan Pulley.
Eric, thank you so much for welcoming everyone. And to those of you on the call with us, we know how beautiful it is outside. So we do appreciate you spending some time with us this evening to learn more about the assignment planning process. And more importantly, so we can capture your thoughts, questions, and feedback related to assignment planning as we start preparing for the 27-28 planning cycle. Before we begin, we want to talk a little bit about the policy that guides our assignment planning process, and that's Board Policy 4150. Contained in this policy are specific instructions for staff directing us to look at the 4 pillars that are outlined here in policy: stability, student achievement, proximity, and operational efficiency. While each of these have their own specific definitions in policy, one of them is not more important than the other, and they all should be considered and weighed and evaluated during the assignment planning process. Before we get too deep into our assignment planning discussion tonight, we're going to take a moment and show you a video that helps to explain how this policy directs staff when it comes to assignment planning, and then we'll come back together.
Understanding student assignment. It's no secret that our school district is growing, and it's growing fast. That means each year we need to address overcrowded schools and often need to open new schools to keep up with this growth. To state the obvious, we may have to reduce the enrollment at an existing school or fill new schools with students. This is done through the annual student assignment process. To best understand when and where new growth is coming in our district, we conduct an annual enrollment forecast. This forecast helps us look ahead up to 10 years and project enrollment growth throughout the district. This information helps us update our capital improvement plan and to make more informed decisions related to school assignments. Each year, some students are assigned to one of our new schools or reassigned to an existing school. This ensures we have balanced school populations across the district. We know families love their schools and that student assignment decisions can be worrisome. That's why we want to be completely transparent in how we make them. Our school board has established 4 pillars that guide each and every student assignment decision. Here's what they mean and how they work together. Student achievement. We want all of our schools to provide the best academic opportunities for our students. This pillar compels us to think about whether a student assignment plan can help reduce high concentrations of poverty or low-performing students at some of our schools. Stability. Essentially, we try to keep as many children at their current school through the exit grade as possible. When reassignments are necessary, we provide the opportunity for some students to submit a stability transfer request and stay at their current school through the exit grade. Operational efficiency. This pillar is about making sure all of our schools and transportation resources are at their best use. Overcrowded schools are a problem. Classrooms packed with too many students are one thing. But then there are the endless carpool lines, bathroom facilities that can't comfortably accommodate everyone, and having to start lunch when most people are still working on breakfast. On the flip side, having under-enrolled schools is an inefficient use of public resources, particularly when there are crowded schools nearby. Proximity. Okay, this one can be a little tricky. In a perfect world, houses would be built in neat little rows on a predictable timeline and at a slow and steady rate. As it is, we live in an imperfect world where lots and lots of homes pop up in one area, while growth is slight or non-existent in others. For this reason, it is impossible to send every child to their most proximate school unless we want some of our schools bursting at the seams while others are half empty. That said, This pillar states that we will send students to schools within a reasonable distance. Often, the difference between the most proximate school and the next most proximate school is no more than a couple of miles. Please remember that we must consider all 4 of these pillars when making assignment decisions. There is no priority among the 4 that applies in every situation. It's a balancing act that ultimately helps us come up with the best possible plan for everyone. Thank you for working with us to ensure our school system continues to serve all students well.
We hope that that video helped to explain the policy a little bit better and how that guidance directs staff when developing enrollment plans. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that enrollment plan process works, starting with our 6-step process. So in addition to the policy guidance, there are 6 essential steps that we follow during each of the annual enrollment planning cycles. And you see here that those start with an annual enrollment forecast and end with looking at utilization concerns. So specific to the 27-28 school year, the enrollment forecast, the projected crowding assessment, and the review of our capital improvement plan have already been completed. Information about these 3 steps can be found on our website if you're interested in learning more about those. And then step 4 is the annual enrollment plan cycle. In fact, we're going to take an opportunity to briefly review all of the steps of the process so that you fully understand how staff and all of the departments across the district work together to prepare an enrollment plan for the board each year. What we'd also like you to notice is that some steps, like step 6 here, are happening at the same time as, in terms of months, right? Are happening in that March to May time period when we're already launching the next enrollment plan. We're still working on the last few elements of the last enrollment plan. So it's a continuous process that's sort of cycling all throughout the year. Again, today we're going to talk mostly about the 27-28 enrollment planning process, but any feedback that we capture today will also help inform future enrollment plans. So let's talk a little bit about the forecast. What you'll notice on the forecast is that we start by following a 3-step process of grabbing data from across the district. We partner with all of our municipal planning partners to include the city of Raleigh and the county of Wake, as well as all of the smaller cities that are scattered throughout the county. And we gather information from them about residential developments and permits and long range plans that they have in their communities. We look at data trends within the district in terms of student enrollment, and we look at a myriad of other demographic factors. And ultimately, we come up with a projected forecast of enrollment for the district. We do the enrollment forecast every year. It does give us a 1 and 10-year cycle, but because of the trends that can change in short periods of time, we find it critical to make sure that we update it every year so that we can account for any of those changes in trends. Here you see one example of a data point that is used in considering what impacts something like birth rates might have on student enrollment in the future in our district. So on the yellow line that you see towards the top of the screen that says births in 2020-21, so 5 years ago, this many recorded births were recorded in local area hospitals. And the blue line below represents how many sort of turned into kindergartners this school year for the 25-26 school year. As you can see, several years ago, the rate difference between these two was a little bit narrower. The birth rate was a good indicator for us of how many kindergartners we could expect 5 years later. We had a little hiccup here around the 2020-2021 time period, and that's obviously when COVID was happening. And you can see that there's been a rebound, and there is now a more predictable relationship between the kindergarten, or excuse me, by the birth rates and the 5 year later kindergarten enrollments. It's a little bit wider gap, but it's still a much more predictable pattern. So this is really helpful for us to try to estimate how many kindergartners we expect 5 years after that particular cycle. The next thing that we do then, like I said, is we take a whole bunch of demographic information. And if you're interested, the full report is available on our website if you'd like to look at the statistical analysis that's done to come up with the forecast. But ultimately, the product is coming up with the forecast that you see here. The lower line that's in this sort of teal blue is our most recent long range or 10-year forecast. As you can see, it's much more conservative than the prior 2 years, where we were looking at potentially growing all the way up to 175 135 or 180,000 students by the 35-36 school year. And so what you're seeing is that although growth is still coming in the district, it's going to be a little bit more conservative and maybe not quite so rapid as it has been over the last several years. Knowing how many students we're going to serve in a future year is important, but knowing where those students are going to be distributed across the county is much more important when we're thinking about specific school assignments. And I hope what you can see here is that it's a little bit variable. You have areas that are predicted to have high growth over the next 10 years and areas that are starting to stabilize with their enrollment and probably won't be seeing rapid growth and will be stabilizing and maybe not need additional seats in those regions in terms of needing to serve students. So if we zoom in a little bit more into the central and southeast Raleigh area, here just for reference, because I know we're in a weird map. This is the belt line, just to kind of give you a reference for where all the arrows lie. You can see to the east of the belt line, kind of heading toward Nightdale, there's still some growth that's coming in that area along 87 and 64. You also see there's some growth projected just south of the belt line as you're heading maybe toward Garner. But within the belt line and just north of the belt line in that sort of central core Raleigh area, it looks like we're starting to see some stabilization. Not as many new students coming into these areas, and perhaps families aging in place or having fewer students, or maybe moving in and not having students at all. So we're seeing some slight differences. There's a few little anomalies. We've got some growth right here in the south central area. And so it's important for us to monitor this as we're thinking about attendance boundaries for schools in this region. Can they absorb the growth that's coming, just south of the city center? Can they absorb the growth that's coming just east of the city center? Or perhaps should that growth be distributed to schools a little farther away from the city center? In addition, we know that for some families in this Southeast Raleigh area in particular, they might not all have the most proximate school assignments. And so, could we take advantage of what we're seeing here with trends to perhaps make some more proximate school assignments for some families in this area? So, those are the kinds of questions and feedback we'd really like to hear from you on today. As a reminder, if you joined us a little bit late, we're using the Q&A feature here in Google Meet. So pop a question in there at any point during the presentation. We're going to collect them all and answer them toward the end of the session. So if you're using a computer, you want to look for this grid on your toolbar. If you're using a mobile device, you want to look for the three dots. Ultimately, you're clicking your way to this question mark icon. And once you see that, you can type in your question. Our moderators will be reviewing that tool and capturing all of your questions throughout the session. We do want to make sure they're anonymous. So once you see that your question has been removed, that's your thumbs up that we did capture your question successfully, and we'll address it later in the evening. Y finalmente, si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. Okay, so let's jump into step two. So step one is figuring out how many students we think we're going to have, in the coming school year and as many as 10 years out. The next step is to say, well, what does that impact look like on the crowding for the coming school year? So for the 26-27 school year, this image shows you the projected crowding for all of the elementary schools across the district. And we have close to like 130 plus elementary schools all across our district. The darker the red color and larger the triangle is, the more crowded it's projected to be. The lighter gray the triangle is and the smaller it is, the less crowded it's projected to be. So when you think about this and you think about that growth map that we just showed you, it lets us know, are we going to get a little crowded in some of these schools, or are some of these schools going to be able to absorb the growth that's coming? So those are factors that we're considering on the planning team as far as how we, assess the impact of that growth against what we're already seeing with crowding in the schools. We've zoomed in here to try to give you an idea of what the central area looks like. So again, I'm going to outline the belt line for you. So the belt line is roughly here. So there's a little bit of North Raleigh in this image, but you can see right here in central Raleigh, these schools are projected to be mostly full. Candidly, a lot of these schools are part of our wonderful magnet program. And so that's part of why they're full. Base students are attending them as well as magnet students from other areas. And so it's keeping them nice and full and healthy. There are a handful of schools that have a little bit of room in this area. So perhaps they can absorb that growth that we saw on the other map. The other thing I'll draw your attention to is that we do have one new school that's coming in the sort of Southeast Raleigh corridor, and it's on Pool Road, and it's called the Pool Road site. I believe it's officially been named Pool Road Elementary. It has not yet started construction. It is projected to open in 2030, which feels really far away, but from our perspective as planners, that's pretty close. So we need to start thinking about what should the attendance boundary look like for this school, which schools in the area that are crowded, maybe a Rogers Lane or a Hodge Road, perhaps a Barwell Road Elementary, could use some relief and perhaps could take advantage of the new seats that are coming online. And then also, as I mentioned, we are familiar, that there are some students that live in this sort of corridor just south of 40 that are not assigned to the most proximate schools. And could we take advantage of these new seats to help get some of those families to schools closer to home? At the middle school level, it's a little bit different picture. We actually are doing a pretty good job from a construction perspective in terms of having enough seats at the middle school level to serve students in the district. We do have a couple of areas where we're still a little bit crowded, and both of these schools are currently capped for their enrollment. And we have a handful of others that are getting really close to that 100% mark, and we just need to keep an eye on them. Zoom into the central area, again, we'll outline the Beltline for you. It's a little easier without all those elementary schools on the map. But that's that central portion of our county in the central part of Raleigh. You can see that the majority of the middle schools here are projected to be in that 90 to 100% crowding range. And again, several of them, in fact, all of them are part of our magnet program. So that's part of why they're so full is they have the combination of base students and the application students from other areas. We do have a little bit of room at Centennial and a little bit of room at Carroll, which is a little bit north center Raleigh, but some things to think about. And then at the high school level, more distribution. We're getting a little bit closer at the high school level, but the one thing we always want to caution you with, probably across all of these maps, is that right now these projected crowding values do include any trailers that are on the campus. So we also are working to find ways to reduce the total number of trailers throughout the district, which would show even more crowding at some of these schools. So we're always balancing that desire to reduce our, dependence on trailers with our need for seats in particular regions. So it's a sort of a difficult balance there. If we zoom in again to the central Raleigh area, we skewed it a little bit west here, but here's your belt line. And you can see that the vast majority of schools in this area are at or over 100% crowding, with a handful of exceptions at Southeast Raleigh and the Vernon Malone College and Career Academy. Okay, so now we know what the crowding is projected to look like for 26, 27. So those are pieces of information that the planning team can consider when thinking about, do any schools need some relief? Do any schools need extra students to be a little bit more successful and full and vibrant? The next step in the process, step 3, is the capital improvement plan, reviewing what is going on with new school construction projects and renovation projects across the district. So here you see a chart that outlines all of the schools that have been approved for construction in the current capital improvement plan. The one that's identified in green is going to open in the 26-27 school year and already has an assignment plan. That's Hilltop Needmore Elementary in the sort of Fuquay area. Morrisville High School is a school that is projected to open for 27-28, and we do need to come up with an enrollment plan or an attendance area for this school in this plan. And then the rest of the schools are projected to open in the year 2030 or 2031 or 2032. And so the one we talked about here in the central Raleigh area is Pool Road Elementary. It's more of a southeast Raleigh area. So this school is projected to open in 2030. We're not quite ready to come up with an attendance boundary, but we do need to start thinking about what that boundary might look like. So these are all of the new schools. And what you may or may not realize is this is a reduction. 2 years ago, we opened, actually this year for the 25-26 school year, we opened 4 schools. And next year we'll only open one. And the year after that, we'll only open one. And for a couple of years, we won't open any. So we're starting to slow the pace at which we're building new schools. And instead, we're starting to focus in on our renovation projects. But before we get too deep into that, just want to show you visually where all these schools are. So the school circled in green is Hilltop Needmore, which will open for the 26-27 school year. The one circled in orange, that's Morrisville High School. It'll be included in this 27-28 enrollment plan. And then all of the other new schools distributed across the county in the future years of the plan. And here's where Pool Road is, which will impact this region. So the renovations that I was just mentioning, we've added a lot more renovation projects to the capital improvement plan. I'm not going to say we've caught up with all of our growth, but we're doing a much better job of managing our growth with the facilities that we have and the facilities that we have lined up to open and to build. So the board has said, let's focus more on all of our existing schools that could use some help, could use some renovations, could use some major um, rehabbing, if you will. And so I've highlighted the schools that are roughly in the southeast or the central Raleigh area with the orange highlighted boxes. Brentwood Elementary, Athens Drive, Magnet High School, Ligon, Magnet Middle, and Washington. Actually, Washington and Brentwood are also magnet schools, and they all happen to be in this area. You may have heard a lot of the discussion about the Ligon project because it is going to be a massive renovation. The Athens Drive project will be a little bit smaller. There's only one portion of the campus that really needs to be addressed. Brentwood is a complete renovation of the entire site. In fact, the students today are in an off-site swing space while their whole campus is being essentially torn down and rebuilt. And Washington Elementary will be a little bit more delicate. It is a historic building, but it'll be a massive renovation to get it back up to modern standards. This list does not include minor renovations that might also be occurring across the district. So you might be aware of other renovation projects that are happening at schools that impact your family that are also helping to improve the conditions at those schools. The reason this group falls on this list is partly because of how they're funded and also because most of these have the potential to increase capacity at the school, which means as we're developing a future enrollment plan, we may want to consider looking at the boundaries of these schools so that more students can attend them. Just to see how those are distributed across the district, there's Swift Creek, there's Brentwood and Lockhart. So the colors of the circles let you know when they're projected to be complete. So Swift Creek should be moving into its facility for 26, 27. Brentwood and Lockhart should be ready to go for 27, 28. And then all the rest of the schools will be in future years. And I just put arrows here just to kind of point at the general location of those that are sort of in the central Southeast Raleigh area. And North Garner and East Garner Middle, which are just south, I mean, they're in Garner, they're not too far from the Southeast Raleigh area. So you can notice that those two projects are also will be underway soon. Okay, so once we have our forecast and we know how many students we're going to need to serve, and we have an idea about what the crowding looks like across the district, and we know for sure which construction projects are moving forward, it's time to do some public engagement. And that's the phase that you're participating in tonight, where we want to figure out what should we know that's unique about your community or your family experience before we come up with any specific recommendations for the board to review. And we've already started some of this engagement activity. If you're interested in seeing what the results of some of those conversations are, they're updated on our assignment planning website. You're more than welcome to review this website on a regular basis. We continuously are updating information as we collect it. The other thing that we do sort of around this same time is to have a meeting with the board and say, okay, here's what the planning team thinks needs to be considered in an enrollment plan. Is there anything else you think we should consider? And so we had this conversation with the board on May 5th, and we talked, of course, about the new high school. And then we were also really clear that when we open up a new school, there's sometimes some feeder pattern alignment that really should be done so that families can have a consistent cohort. So, as the student moves from fifth grade to sixth grade and eighth grade to ninth grade, that they're following their friends, their peers on to the next school. And so we've been making a conscientious effort in recent enrollment plans to add those in at the same time that we come up with a boundary for a new school. So we did talk about that. And because this is a high school and it'll move quite a few students, there's a possibility that there could be some cascading or domino impacts on the other schools in the area as they lose students to the new school. And so there may be some other impacts. So essentially, the Morrisville and Western Cary area, we've been trying to communicate with that area for a couple of years now to just kind of get them prepared that there might be some assignment changes. We talked about the completed renovation projects. As Swift Creek moves back into its site, we'll be monitoring its enrollment to determine if the extra capacity could be used to support crowded schools in the region, or if it'll just, absorb all of its current enrollment attendance area. And then the other concerns, and this list maybe doesn't get enough attention. This is where there are some small changes that we can make that have big impacts for families and ideally in a positive way. One would be to look at schools that are continued to be crowded or capped and see if there's some assignments that we could make that would reduce that pressure on those schools so that the schools wouldn't be so crowded. Looking at regional enrollment balances. If I have two schools that are kind of close to each other and one's really, really crowded and one's not, or one has a particular demographic makeup and the other one is a different, can we use our assignment planning tools to try to have a better equitable distribution of students across those schools so that both schools are well resourced and have the proper staff and environment so that all students can be successful in those campuses. We also want to look at if you may be aware that the board is considering taking some multi-track year-round schools that aren't full right now, that are underutilized, and reducing them to either a single track or a traditional. If they do approve some of those calendar changes, we want to be mindful of any assignment plan changes that might be needed to support those changes. Maybe there's some feeder pattern issues or some imbalances of enrollment that could be also leveled out at the same time. And then specific, I think, really to the central and southeast Raleigh area would be the last two bullets, which is looking at the feeder assignments. We do know that in some cases, you might be at one elementary school in this region, you might have an assignment to a middle school a little bit further away, and then maybe you come back to a nearby high school, and that's very disjointed, and the student doesn't really have a natural group of peers that they're moving with as they go through their school experience. So we've been looking at those. We've been hearing, so we'd love to hear feedback from the community about how important that is or is not for families. We've also heard some families tell us that they really don't like if they have a assignment to a school that's maybe a little bit further away than they prefer, perhaps because it historically has been to assigned to a school in a different community. You might be in the Southeast Raleigh or Central Raleigh area, but assigned to a school in Apex or Garner or even in the Middle Creek region. We'd really love to hear feedback on whether or not you'd like to maintain those assignments or if you would prefer assignments to schools a little bit closer to home. And that would not only help you with proximity concerns, but it would help us with transportation efficiency because our bus routes would be a little bit shorter. So we definitely want to hear thoughts, questions, and feedback around that particular topic for this region. We'll come back to the assignment planning process in a minute, but as we go through the process, once we have an enrollment plan approved, and so in this case, it'll probably be November. Around November is when the board is projected to approve a final plan for the 27-28 school year. Then staff will say, okay, here are the adjustments we were able to make for 27-28. Are there any schools that are still so overcrowded that they actually might need a cap on their enrollment, where we might have to assign some of the newer students to a school a little bit further away because there's just not room at the school that they're at? There's not too many in this area. The closest ones I can think of might be Riverbend Elementary, Rogers Lane Elementary. I think we've done a good job of managing enrollment in the central and southeastern Raleigh area, but you can see the full list here of schools. Most of them are a little bit farther out, maybe in the western part of the county or the northwestern part of the county. And we've even had to add one in the eastern part of the county at Zebulon Elementary. There were a handful of changes that were approved this year, so the list is a little bit shorter for the 26-27 school year than it was for the current school year. And any of those changes that were approved will take effect on July 1. All right, so once that's been done, then it's time to look and see, okay, where are we at now with all the other utilization concerns? Do we have schools that are underutilized that could benefit from some track reductions? Do we have some schools that are overutilized that might could benefit from being multi-track? Are there other recommendations that we could make beyond, adding or removing trailers, but something that's really an assignment concern? And so those are the type of discussions that would happen as we enter into that last step of a plan. And candidly, that last step sort of always overlaps the public engagement part of the next plan. So those are both happening at the same time right now. So you might be hearing in the news discussions about schools that are multi-track year round being proposed to either go traditional or single track 4. That's the tail end of last year's process kind of tying up while we're right in the middle of this year's process. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the assignment planning process. Hopefully that helps you to get a better understanding of the really thorough and data-driven process that we use as a planning team, as well as the importance of the public engagement part to help inform and provide experiential information so the planning team can really be thinking about individual family experiences when making recommendations. But you can find all of the same information that we just talked through, even a video that kind of explains the process a little bit more succinctly if you're interested and that is offered in both English and Spanish narration. So there's two separate videos. You're welcome to go to this website and find that information. All right, so at this point, I think I'm going to turn things back over to our host and get ready for any questions that the group may have.
All right. Make sure you get a breath, take a drink of water. We're still on the clock. It really is, folks, our hope that the information we shared can help kind of open the doors a little bit to the overall process. Before we get to your questions, we'd like to review where we are in the planning process and highlight what's coming up next. First, please contribute to the thought exchange for this topic, which will remain open through May 24th. Also, we welcome you to bookmark the assignment planning website and visit it regularly for updated information and to find ways to participate in future engagement activities. And then finally, we would recommend that you tune into the board work sessions over the next few months to hear updates on the public engagement process and to review the initial draft of the 27-28 enrollment plan. We've reviewed a lot of information and we would like to address as many of your questions as possible. So please take a few moments, if you haven't already, to post any questions or comments using the Q&A feature. As you're posting questions, we'll review questions that were submitted during the session and start with those. All right. Susan, have you had a second to catch your breath?
Yes, but I had to remember to turn my mic back on.
None of us have ever been guilty of that.
No.
Not me all the time. Okay.
All right.
So I am going to front load this first question a little bit because we have thinking about the four pillars, and it's possible that the person who asked this question may have missed that part where we discussed the four pillars, but it's also evident in some areas in the county that proximity is not the highest piece in the decision. And I think that's probably where this one is coming from. So, can you explain why an elementary school is assigned to a far off area, what seems pretty far off for elementary, when it might be the fifth or sixth closest school to where they live? And maybe those five closer schools don't necessarily have overcrowding. What are the other factors that play into making that assignment?
So one thing I'll say, particularly in the central and southeast Raleigh area, is the density of elementary schools in the area. So if I live here, this school and that school and that school and that school and that, all of these schools in this sort of area might all be relatively close to where I live. Where if you get to other regions of the county, there's just not that many schools to choose from. And so as we balance the enrollments across all of the schools in a particular region, we do think about that, if is this school much closer than this, is this school all that much closer than this school or this school? Can we keep you in a relatively proximate range? One thing I will clarify is that our policy does not specifically define any distances for proximity. It simply says the closest school with available capacity is sort of how it's interpreted and shared with staff. So that's one. It could just be that because of the density of schools in your region, the closest school might already be full with students that live really close to it, and otherwise we would try to get more students at it. The second piece, kind of looking at that student achievement piece, is we have, especially in the central part of the district, our historic magnet program, right? The historic success of our magnet program to redistribute and rebalance students into schools that at one point in time were really under enrolled and had, back in the 70s, were really considered to be either racially or socioeconomically isolated, meaning that they were disproportionately different from all the other schools sort of in the district. And so ever since I want to say the early 80s, I'm sure there's a specific date we could point to, but I'm going to get it wrong. So I'll just say early 80s, we developed the magnet program in which a lot of the schools, particularly in the central Raleigh area, were converted to magnet programs, meaning that there's a portion of the school that's filled up with students that live near to the school or in the base attendance area of the school. And then the remaining students come in from other areas, usually crowded rural or suburban areas in the district, to help balance the student population in the school as well as to fill up all those seats. So, because of the success of these magnet programs, we're now starting to see changes in the housing patterns inside Central and Southeast Raleigh. So that's largely it's one of those two. It's either because your closest school is already filled with students who live even closer than you do, or it's because it's an assignment that was made probably in the 80s or 90s when we were working to address the districts at that time desegregation issues and their historic assignments that had been in place for a while. But we recognize that that time has passed and that we're in a new era. Our board has asked us to really be thinking about how far is too far, right? And so that is definitely feedback we could use from the community to help us understand how far is too far, and where what are the real pain points for those types of families that might be assigned to a school that's the fifth or sixth closest school. I hope that
Can
addresses.
you re- can you repeat when we expect to get information about the next proposed reassignment plan?
Sure. Let me get to the next steps. So, we will be coming to the board in June with an update just on the public feedback. We've been collecting feedback over the last couple of years, but for this particular series, we started in March. So, in June, we'll be going to the work session of the board and sharing with them the feedback we've collected and how that might be shaping the planning efforts. And then the first series of maps, if you will, of proposed changes would be shared with the board in September. And then that'll kick off a whole different planning cycle. So once the board gets initial recommendations in September, we'll go out and do additional public engagement so that people can respond to the specific recommendations. And then in October, we'll come back to the board with review of all of the feedback collected and any revisions that staff feels are necessary. And then we'll move on to a final approval in November.
Susan's going to take a moment to quiet the fur babies that are hanging out in her office.
Yes. Thank you.
We both struggle with that because I have four downstairs that desperately want me to take them on their evening walk.
Yes.
How do you determine if a school opens as traditional or year-round?
Great question. Historically, it's been a combination of factors, but in recent history, the last 2 or 3 years, if it's an elementary school, particularly one of our brand new elementary schools, we've been starting with a recommendation of multi-track year round because we are aware that these may be the last of the new schools we're going to get for some period of time because of our shift in emphasis on renovating existing schools. So you'll find that a lot of our recommendations at the elementary level in particular, because of the kindergarten through third grade class size legislation that limits how many students can be in those classes, we're recommending that they're multi-track. We tried a different tactic this year with Hilltop Needmore and said we want the board to approve it as a multi-track, but because there's still growth in its attendance area, open it on track 4 only, so that as the development starts to come and fill up the school when it's needed, it would then flex, if you will, to the multi-track and expand out. For those of you that might be familiar with Lake Myra and Wendell, it's getting ready to do that. It's been operating on track 4 for a while, but because of all of the growth in the area around it, it's getting ready to become a multi-track school with the start of the 26-27 school year. Middle schools, we haven't opened one in quite some time, and I believe the last handful have been a mixed bag of multi-track and traditional based on the alignments for the elementary schools that it's serving. And at the high school level, they'll always open on traditional calendar. We've made that commitment as a district to maintain the traditional calendar for high schools.
I've heard about stability rules being applied to reassign students. Can you explain the general rules overall? Are they different for new schools? So make the distinction
Sure.
between students who are reassigned existing to existing
Mhm.
and newly opened schools.
Sure.
Yeah.
So by policy, it's very limited, right? The policy says the guarantee is that a rising fifth grade student, a rising eighth grade student, or a rising 12th grade student that's subject to any kind of reassignment would be eligible to get a stability transfer and stay at their current school. And that's without transportation. And I will say almost every single one of our stability transfers are without transportation. And we realize that that's a challenge, but I hope you'll hear me that the better part's coming. So that's the bare minimum. And then each year, when an enrollment plan is developed and proposed, the staff comes up with recommendations for stability rules for that specific set of recommendations. And what Eric was referencing is that typically when it's a new school, and we've really been opening new elementary schools, has really been the area we've been focusing on over the last several years. So when a new elementary school opens, what staff has been recommending and the board has been approving is expanded stability rules. So not just the fifth graders, but the fourth graders, and not really just the fifth and fourth graders, any of their younger siblings as well. So as long as that rising fourth or fifth grader that's impacted by the assignment puts in their transfer and they have a rising kindergarten through third grade sibling kind of coming in underneath them, they get approved for transfers as well. And the board has been really generous and approved those through the fifth grade. So, historical context, it used to only be rising fifth grade students. The siblings could get a 1 year transfer to continue to attend the school for 1 year as long as the fifth grader was there. But once the fifth grader went to sixth grade, they had to go back or be assigned to the new school once that fifth grader left, that sort of anchoring student. So, currently at the elementary level, the board for new schools has said rising fourth and fifth grade students could stay at their current school and any of their younger siblings could join them and would also have the option to stay all the way through the fifth grade if that works best for the family. So that's one set. If it's an assignment from schools that are already open and we're just rebalancing enrollments to take advantage of some open seats and to relieve crowding at one school, some of those examples we talked about in the middle of the discussion, the board has been even more generous with staff's and supporting staff's recommendation that all students at any grade, regardless of if they had that anchoring older fourth or fifth grade student, they could stay. We've had that work at the middle school level as well and at the high school level. High schools are a little different because our high schools open with ninth and 10th grade only if it's a brand new high school. So if it's a brand new high school, only ninth and 10th graders are assigned to the new campus. 11th and 12th graders remain at their current school because that is technically their assignment, and they actually even have bus transportation. What the board has allowed for with the opening of Felton Grove as our example is that if you have a rising ninth or 10th grade sibling that's attached to one of those 11th or 12th graders, they could also get that stability transfer, but they're going to run out of transportation at some point. Once that older student ages out, the transportation will go away. But the board has been a little bit generous there. So if you've got very specific questions about your individual student, drop your email into the Q&A because it is protected and anonymous, and we can have a staff member reach out and talk to you through the specifics for your student. So that's kind of where it is. If it's a new school, it's a little bit more restrictive. If it's an existing school to an existing school, it's been very generous. So the compromise is with no transportation. So that way we can be as generous as possible with the transfers, but we're not putting a burden on our transportation department that we couldn't, survive, if you will, that would really put too much pressure on the system and be a bit of a faulty promise or a broken promise.
How does the system handle staffing changes when kids are reassigned or new schools are opened?
Great question. So there's two different strategies here with existing schools to existing schools because of the generous stability transfers. The principals will know very early, usually December, January, how many students are choosing to stay at their current school, and then they can make their staffing adjustments. So they have plenty of time to talk with their staff and say, hey, we're going to be down and maybe not need quite as many second grade teachers, or maybe we won't need as many PE teachers, whatever it is. They can have those honest conversations with their staff very early in the semester so that those staff members could participate in transfer portal activities or choose to go to the new school. A lot of times there's a balance of veteran teachers that want to go and help open a new school, and that helps voluntarily choose to go to a different school. So the combination of staff members voluntarily choosing to go to the new school or voluntarily choosing to go to a different school, as well as principals getting information really early so they can have open and honest conversations with their staff. In addition, our human resources department does a great job of just continuing to, market and recruit and identify really good talent. So particularly for our schools that are looking for new teachers to backfill vacancies, they've also got a really good applicant pool to work from. So there's a combination of human resources, principals, and our staff in the Office of Student Assignment sharing with them headcount numbers. And so it's a full support system, if you will, to make sure that everybody is well taken care of in these transitions.
You've mentioned wanting to prioritize children growing together through the education system. How is that accomplished when district lines, and I'm not clear on what the person means
Mhm.
with terminology, but create islands or silver portions.
Slivers, maybe
So
slivers.
it says silver.
Probably
I'm
means
not sure.
slivers. Right. So I think they may be referring to what we at the district level call a satellite assignment area, where you might be sort of an island or an isolated subdivision or apartment complex or something like that, that students around you go to a different school, but your students go to this other set of schools. So, yes, that's part of what we've been holistically looking at over the last 4 or 5 years to identify, is there a need for that satellite to be so different and separate from the students around it anymore? If yes, can we at least make sure that that cohort ages together and goes forward and doesn't have a fragmented feeder pattern? If no, could it be absorbed into the attendance area that sort of surrounds it? We have them all over the district for lots of different reasons. At one point in time, particularly, I want to say in like 2010 to 2020 space, when there was rapid growth, particularly in the western part of our county, we were going and finding undeveloped land, basically dirt, and putting a little boundary around it and assigning it to a school a little bit further away when we knew that the school that was closest to it couldn't handle the additional students. We also have some that are those historic assignment areas I was talking about earlier that sort of took place when we were merging our two districts, the city district and the county district, and working on our desegregation goals back in the 70s and 80s. So there's lots of reasons why those satellites or slivers might exist, but we are continuing to evaluate and assess each and every one. And that's why it really, again, is important that you share with us if you have a name of a community that you'd like for us to explore or investigate, if you have information about assignment that's too far away or that feels fragmented. We have a lot of data rich sources, but your personal experience really helps us a lot. So you can contribute those either in the thought exchange. I will just say in the thought exchange, please don't use personally identifiable information. Don't share like your student's name or your actual address. But if you want to name your community, your subdivision name, a major cross street, that'd be really, really helpful because that way everyone on the planning team can see that recommendation or suggestion. And it's not just, the two of us here on the meeting looking at that information. So I'm glad that came up. That's exactly the kind of information we're trying to get from the community.
Is there a distance requirement for how far a kindergarten child may be expected to walk to the bus stop? Not to the
Mm.
school, but to the bus stop.
I think there is, but that is outside the scope of what we do, so I don't actually know that off the top of my head. If we can capture that, we'll get that to transportation and we'll get that added to the FAQ portion of our website so that we can get that answer for that parent. There is some policy around it, and is some guidance that's given to the transportation department as they're establishing the stops, but I do not want to misspeak and get it wrong. So we'll need to take that to our friends in transportation, but we'll get an answer for you and we'll put it in the FAQ portion of our website.
There are a couple of submissions that are kind of more specific to their transfer situation,
Okay.
and so I'm not sure that this is the appropriate
Okay.
place
Sure.
to address those. That said, folks, if you have a very specific question about your transfer request that has uh, not been approved, or there's other information that you want to get out of that, please send an email specifically to student assignment
Trying to find that.
at wcpss.org. This would, as Susan and I like to talk to people and we don't
Mhm.
mind answering questions, but in front of other people here is
And on the
probably
recording.
not the appropriate place. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably not the appropriate place for that.
And since the questions are being captured anonymously, if you want to drop your email in there, we can farm that out to a staff member as well. So whichever
Yeah,
way.
we can do that too. We can do that too. Okay, so that covers the questions that have been submitted.
Okay.
Are there other things that have been asked in previous sessions that jump to mind for you that you think would be helpful for folks to know here?
I think it's really kind of what we mentioned with the individual unique experience that you have. I think I've heard some questions about distance, about new developments, or we hear, well, gosh, I've been living in this community for a while and that's a new development. How come they get to go to the school and I'm still being sent to a school further away? That's a very valid question and concern. And so anything you can do with particularly and I don't want to act like we don't want to hear it, as Eric said, we do. What the power of the thought exchange is, one, everybody on the planning team and every board member can see the comment right there in one place because everybody has access to it. Two, other members of your community can see that and rate that and kind of give it a thumbs up so we can see the energy in the community around that particular idea. And then three, it what's kind of the same thing as the first. It really consolidates all of the content into that one space so that when we're siphoning through all of the various pieces of public experience and suggestion and concern and question, we can get it all evaluated and assessed as we're coming into a next enrollment plan cycle. And I also want to say, don't be disparaged if you don't see it in the 27-28 plan, because we have very specific goals we're trying to accomplish as we're opening a new high school. We have a northern area that's got a very fragmented feeder pattern. This area in particular, we know there are some portions that have some fragmented feeder patterns. So please know that if the concern you elevate isn't addressed directly in the 27-28 plan, it could potentially be addressed in the 28-29 plan. So keep sharing that information because we are continuously working. It's hard for everyone who's not in our roles to understand that we have 160,000 plus students. We're soon going to have 204 schools. So any percent change that we do in the district impacts a lot of families, and we're trying really hard to provide as much stability as possible for families. And we don't want to make an assignment change that's just going to be a changed again in 2 or 3 years. We really want to provide as much stability for families as possible. So if we can't find a really good solution for a particular challenge in year one that we know would last for 10 or 15 or 20 years, we might hold off until we can find a better solution that we can put in a future plan. So we are constantly, and that's one thing that makes us different as a district. It's embedded in our policy that we evaluate our assignments annually. Most districts don't have that embedded in their policy and they wait 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years and then do a massive reassignment of everybody. And we try really hard to do small incremental adjustments that make things a little bit better along the way and still keep as many families as possible in stable school assignments. So it's this constant balance between trying to correct or fix or adjust things, but also maintain stability for students, schools, and families.
And there was, Susan, you actually, for those of you who don't know, because you probably don't know the history,
Mhm,
this is Susan's second tour in student assignment. And
mhm,
so during her first tour, there was a lot of people getting hit quickly
mhm.
with multiple changes, not intentionally,
Right.
but families getting hit with multiple changes. And one of the things that definitely came from customer feedback, per
Mhm.
se, is hey, we're getting hit rapid fire with this because our area is changing so much so quickly. But is there anything you can do to minimize that?
Right.
And so
Yes, there
Susan
yeah.
really works with outside folks and inside folks to take concerted efforts,
Yeah.
not to hit families
Right.
with changes in
We
that
had
rapid
families that
fire
were
succession.
having changes in one levels. It could have been, let's say, elementary. They were having a change in their elementary assignment every year for 2 or 3 or 4 years in a row because of how fast things were growing in certain regions, and we heard very clearly and very loudly, "That's not quite the right way to do it." That we really wanna try to be a little bit more long-term and strategic and not quite so reactive, and because families your student your students are very fungible, they're very flexible, they're young, they're adaptable, but still changing their school assignment 2 or 3 years in a row without even changing grade spans, like going from 2nd to 3rd to 4th to 3 different elementary schools. If we can avoid that, we absolutely want to do that for families. We don't want to be changing things that rapidly. And ideally, we'd love to change it once and then leave it alone for 20 years, you know?
There is there was a submission. If this is a new build and we live zero point 0.5 miles away from a school that we think is under enrolled, how does that align with the justification given? And this is again probably could be about a satellite node, could
For sure.
also potentially
Yeah.
be just a change in the way that gentrification
Mhm.
of an area.
Yeah. I would encourage whoever this participant is to maybe put the name of their subdivision, or if it's not a true proper subdivision, some cross streets so that we can look into that particular example. Because certainly, from a transportation and walkability, if a student can safely walk to school, we would love for them to attend a school that they can safely walk to or roll to. Um, if it's a now, if it's a half a mile, but it's across 540, well, that might be a little different, right? That might be a slightly more complex challenge, and so there might be some reasons why we have you going to a school on one side or the other of a major highway, so that students aren't faced with having to traverse over, high speed. Um, Highways and freeways and so forth. So please, I would ask that the individual to maybe give us some more context so that we could look into that and see what's happening. Um, and a new build, it could refer to a recent renovation that's new construction, or it could be a brand new school. So that makes it a little, we just need to know what the area is. I will say not all of our renovations, in case it's that, right? Not all of our renovations actually expand the capacity of a school, particularly in the central area because of permitting, historic requirements for some of the facilities that are in our central Raleigh area, because some of them, predate the merger. They're hundreds of years old, even in some cases, in terms of having historical context. So sometimes just because it gets renovated and it looks like it's new and big doesn't mean there's actually additional seats in the school. And so we can't really expand the attendance area for the school. The students who were already assigned to the school just simply return to their newly renovated facility. But if it is an expanded capacity and it is that close, then we certainly want to be looking at ways to get students to schools that are a little bit closer. So thank you for bringing that forward, and please, if you feel comfortable, share at least like your cross streets or something so we can do some planning, digging into that and see what the complexities are for your neighborhood.
And I think they've given us that
Okay,
information, so
perfect.
we're good
Awesome.
there. All right.
So if
Well,
you have
ladies,
friends or family, right, that couldn't join us, or neighborhood, this is going to be posted. We're looking at whether or not there might be some energy about doing this again, maybe later in the summer. So any feedback that y'all might have on how frequent or regularly we should do sessions like this for the community, we'd take any suggestions and advice for that too. We want to reach as many families as possible. Sorry, Eric, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, no worries, no worries. And folks, thank you very much. We hope that the session has been informative and that you better understand the overall enrollment planning process. Separately, we tremendously appreciate your open and honest participation. Your input and your feedback is vital in informing the development of the next enrollment plan and continuing enrollment plans in Wake County. Remember, we will present a summary of the feedback received to the board during a work session in June. The thought exchange is going to remain open through May 24th, and we encourage you to continue to post comments, rate comments, and explore the exchange over the next few months. Again, Thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope that you enjoy the remainder of your evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.